Hi, this is Erica, the host of the Just Say Maybe podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today I'm here with Louann. She has an Instagram handle that's name is the Marionette Pianist. Is that right?
Yes.
I saw Louann's Instagram reels and I thought they were really interesting and really cool. And the fact that we both play piano was something that I was especially interested in. So, yeah, Luann has kindly agreed to join me on this episode for today. Thanks, Luann. Is there anything you want to say to introduce yourself or anything you want to, yeah, share with the audience?
Yeah, well, like Erica said, I'm a pianist. I've been playing since I was five, and but I'm for work profession. I'm actually a board certified neurologist. So that's kind of what I do. But I love both for sure. Piano is definitely up there among my big loves
And how long have you been playing piano now?
since I was five.
Okay, yeah, so about the same age as me. And you said that your parents are from Taiwan?
Yeah, yeah. I was
Okay,
born there, but my mom brought us to the U.S. when I was 2.5. So I basically
okay.
grew up in the U.S.
And did they also play piano growing up?
You know, they. My mom doesn't. My mom came from a very poor background, and so she worked really hard and kind of made got herself successful and stuff. But I think that was one of her biggest dreams was piano. It's kind of well, I guess stereotypically everybody Asian or and in Taiwan around at least around that
Yeah.
time. Everybody was in lessons, music lessons, piano, and I think she just always wanted to play, maybe herself even, I don't know. But whenever since I was a kid, she put us in lessons. My older brother was also put in lessons. I guess we were put in lessons at the same time, but
Okay.
he didn't end up sticking with it, oddly enough. He he decided he wanted to quit after 2 years.
Oh
um,
no.
and for whatever reason, he got to quit. She let him quit, but she didn't let me quit. I asked her why. I was like, is there like a special reason or a specific reason
Hmm.
why I wasn't allowed to quit? And her only answer was, because you're a girl.
Oh, interesting. I wasn't expecting that answer.
Yeah, I don't know what that has to do with it, but I don't know. But I don't know, in like the Asian culture and Taiwanese, like there's girls, gender stuff, and boys, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe it's I think girls and women are pushed more towards creative forms of expression and men and boys are sometimes pushed more towards things that are technology related or sports related. So I guess I can
Yeah,
kind of see that.
that would be
Yeah,
a good
that would
guess.
probably where it's coming from. What are some of your favorite pieces to play?
I love Chopin. Definitely in more recent years and adult years, I definitely learned a lot more Chopin. Growing up, so when I was young taking lessons, because my hands are small, I only can reach an octave. So my teacher had me playing a lot of Bach, or Bach, to be more
Yeah,
accurate. I didn't
yeah.
get a piano degree, so I'm not as up to par like you are for people with
That's okay.
piano degrees. But I played a lot of Bach and then Debussy and Mozart. Played a lot of that. That didn't the stuff that what didn't require a lot of the big chords and all of that. I didn't really get to play Beethoven hardly at all. All the sort of stuff that I heard my teachers other students playing as I got older. So I didn't get to
Yeah,
play a lot of that bigger sounding, more advanced repertoire. I did play a little bit of Chopin already in high school. So I learned the Berceuse by Chopin,
mm-hmm.
and then Fantasy Impromptu in high school. Oh, and then like a couple of the waltzes, like the earlier, like the intermediate level waltzes and stuff. But
Cool.
I mean, I would love to have been able to play like the polonaises, like the heroic polonaise. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I love that
I
piece.
know.
I watch
Yeah,
like YouTube videos of like professionals playing it and
I
stuff.
know. I know. It's such a great piece, but it's very demanding, I think, physically, especially that octave section where it's just madness for 3 pages. So
Yeah.
yeah, I wish I had more videos of me playing it in college because that was probably the best I ever played it. But it's still really hard, even if you do have a pretty big finger span or hand span. So, and also, by the way, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's possible to like correctly pronounce all of the composers' names because I mean, yeah, you're not from that place. And I don't know, there's this one composer, Wagner, right? But his name is spelled Wagner. And when I was in
Ah.
college, I called him Wagner by accident one time, and all of my friends just started laughing at me. And they're like, "Oh
Oh
my
no.
god, like, don't you mean Wagner?" And I was like, "Wow, this is so snobby." But this is kind of
Oh
what the
yeah.
classical
Elitist,
music,
yeah. Bearing of the onion.
community
There
is
you go.
like. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, it was, all in good fun. Yeah, so that's something that I think a lot of people know about you because you do post publicly on Instagram and all of your videos are pretty much piano related. But is there something that most people don't know about you?
Yeah, actually. So, and my husband actually made this observation. So when I'm sitting, unless you see me, like actually one of the performances that I did in Taiwan last year, and you saw me how I got
Ooh.
to the piano. If you just look at the videos of me playing, you wouldn't know just by seeing the videos that I have to use a wheelchair.
Hmm.
But I do. And then if a person who doesn't know me sees me out in public in my wheelchair, they wouldn't know that I could still walk a little bit. So
Okay.
I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user, so I kind of have that as my mobility aid to get
Okay.
around. And so
Can
yeah,
you
that
explain
would
what
be
that
for
means? That term,
yeah.
ambulatory wheelchair user?
So so I have to use a wheelchair, but I can still walk. It's just the
Okay.
distances that I can walk have become much shorter over time because I have a
Hmm.
medical condition, a muscle disease that it's a type of a progressive muscle disease. So it makes me get weaker and weaker over time. So when I was in my early 20s, that's when the muscle weakness started. So I was able to walk a lot more back then, but this is going on. I mean, I guess almost 20 years now.
Right.
so the distances that I'm able to walk now are just so short. I don't even know what, I don't know, like 200 feet, and I'm like tired.
So that makes sense. So if you're walking out on stage performing, then that distance is still less than 200 feet from
Right. Yeah.
behind
Well,
the curtain
actually,
to the piano.
what actually happened, so for my concert last year in Taiwan, my husband just pushed me into the piano up in my wheelchair. And I
Oh,
can't even
okay.
stand up. I can't even stand up from my manual wheelchair because it's actually my mom got it in China, so it's actually a
Mm.
little bit smaller than the standard American size wheelchair, and it sits lower to the ground. So over the years, as I got weaker, I can't stand from it anymore. So
Oh,
he
I
has
see.
he has to pull me up and
Oh,
help me to stand
yeah.
up. Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine it's like you're doing, if it's really low to the ground, it's like you're doing a low squat and then you have to just get back
Exactly.
up without any momentum or anything. That sounds very
Right,
hard.
exactly. That's kind of how it goes. How the weakness progressed over the years is that as my hip muscles were got weaker over time, I just the the chair height that I was able to stand from, it just got more and more difficult to
Hmm.
stand up from. I've got a ton of mobility aids around the house. It's ridiculous, but when I was in medical school and residency, I used an electric scooter to get around the hospital, and so I
Okay.
have this like it's like a folding seat cane thing. Anyway, I was able to like open it up, and I was able to sit down in it, and I could stand up from it.
Oh, that's
Um,
very
at
cool.
at one point in the past, but now there at some point, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I stopped being able to stand up from it because the height was too low to the ground. I have
Yeah.
this really weird, like I have a very narrow height range at which I can function at all. So
Mm.
if something is too low to like sit down into, then I can't stand up from it. But I'm also
Yeah.
very short. So if something
Right.
is too high, I'm only 4 feet 8 inches tall. So if something is too high, then I can't get up on it. So like our bed situation is
Right.
it is at a very specific height. Like I can
Oh my
I can get
gosh.
onto the bed, but then it's also tall enough that I can stand up from it.
Wow. That's
So it's like a
crazy.
nightmare. It's like a nightmare going to anywhere, like a hotel or something like that, where the bed heights are
Mm,
different. So it's
right.
either most of the time I can't easily get onto it because it's too high.
So in that situation, do you need to have help being carried onto the bed, or are you able to
Yeah, we
get on your
call it
own
like
way?
my system of getting on the bed. Like I ninja onto the bed.
You
So
ninja.
I kind of
Okay.
learned this. You learn strategies when you have a
Yeah.
disability. You just got to roll with whatever new changes come your way. So um, a long time ago, I just learned to kind of just throw, like flip myself onto the bed,
Oh my goodness. That's crazy.
like just fling myself, kind of rolling over, kind of halfway. Well, I basically am kind of rolling over onto my back as I fling
Yeah.
myself into position. So,
I'm just
so when we're in a
imagining you
hotel,
like body slamming the bed. You're just like,
yeah,
boom.
kind of, basically. Very
Yeah.
awkward. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I don't fling so hard that I'm injuring myself. But
Right.
it is kind of like that motion where it's like I just jump in and flip over.
Oh my God.
So when I don't know, I'm trying to remember the last hotel we had to go to. Yeah, I just know that it because the hotel beds are usually higher than my bed at home. It was it was too high for me to easily just ninja myself and flip over onto my back.
Oh man. Yeah, that's interesting to think about because I think for a lot of people, myself included, honestly, is when you think about accommodations for disabilities, you usually think about the wheelchair ramp, and having elevators and things like that. But then you don't really think about the height of certain things like beds and chairs
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and how
Yep.
are people in wheelchairs supposed to get into like a booth at a restaurant or like a high chair, So
Exactly.
yeah.
And that actually that has come up more too. And because my this wheelchair that I'm sitting in right now, it's got a headrest, and I mean it's like a
Hmm.
fancy full support type of a wheelchair. And this is because as my weakness has progressed in the last like 18 years, I came to need this type of a full support wheelchair. So because in the past, when I was able to walk a bigger distance, I would just rather walk into a restaurant. Like if the parking lot is small,
Yeah.
and I have a handicap placard, so we just if
Hmm.
there's a close spot and there's not too much walking, I would always used to prefer to sit in the restaurant chair because like it's the normal height. It's made at the
Right.
proper like the ratio for your arms to be eating over the
Hmm.
table, and it's not this awkward because now with this chair it's fancy, so it has a lot of mechanisms, and it actually sits higher than the normal restaurant chair. So the problem is either the the seat, like my knees would almost be touching the underneath of the table.
Oh
So
wow.
it's higher. Yeah,
That's
it's
pretty high.
higher. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
higher. And then the armrest, it would never. I have to flip up the armrest in order to be able to get close enough to the table to eat because the armrests
Yeah.
are at the height of the table that gets in the way. So there's that. that has come up. And then like our kitchen, when we moved in here, we remodeled the kitchen and our bathroom, but we deliberately chose not to have the upper cabinets. What traditionally that everybody else.
Oh,
And the
yes.
contractors kept thinking that we were crazy. They're like, "Well, if you don't, what do you mean you don't want to put in the upper cabinets? Like, you're never going to be able to sell this house. No one's going to ever want it."
Right.
I was like, "Well, why do we need it? Like, it's not like I would ever be able to reach it."
Yeah, exactly. And a step stool seems out of the question then as well if you were to.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be able to. Yeah, it would be dangerous. I wouldn't even be able to step up onto it. But then,
Mm,
as part of my muscle weakness, it also affects my shoulders,
okay.
my upper arms, my proximal muscles. So it's like I can't even reach. I wouldn't even be able to reach up. Like I can't even move my arms at this point. I have to always use my other arm to like
Oh, wow.
lift one
Okay.
arm up.
Is you have an arm that holds up another arm sometimes?
Yeah, so I don't really have a. I'm right-handed, just like
Okay.
normal, like writing and eating and stuff. But whichever arm I'm choosing to need to reach for something, I have to switch and have the other arm to be able to to move it, to lift it. And
I
it's actually
see.
funny. One of my co-residents, when I was in residency, he was kind of like doing an impression of me, and he was like doing this with his arms, because that's
Oh
the
my
only way
goodness.
I can like hand gesture. You know what I mean? Like I guess even
Oh,
though my arms are like weak, I still like just want to gesture.
yeah. Yeah,
He
yeah,
was
yeah.
like doing this with his arm. I don't even know how much of it you can see on the camera, but
Yeah.
like okay, so this is one hand. I have to like push my hand over, like to be able to point at something.
Oh,
So
I see. So you have to like hold up your hand to kind of
yeah,
point
yeah,
at something
exactly.
else.
That's exactly it. And he was doing an impression of me doing that.
Oh my God. Well, yeah. If he's seen it enough times and you guys are, you get along well, I feel like that's fine, right? Like
Yeah.
that sounds funny. So it sounds like you've had to kind of rearrange a lot of your lifestyle to fit where like your disability is now.
So I have a mitochondrial disease. So it's a mitochondrial myopathy.
Mitochondrial
Myopathy in
myopathy.
the myopathy in medical terms means muscle disease. It
Okay.
implies a muscle pathology, and so
Okay.
it's from a mitochondrial disease.
Yeah, it's good to know the medical term, even if I don't exactly know what it means. But yeah, it seems like muscle weakness and progressive muscle weakness over time. So, and you
Yeah,
started when you were towards the end of college, or were you already out of college by then?
yeah. I guess probably looking back, you could say that it maybe was the tail end of college years, but by my first year of medical school, so I was early 20s. How was I? I think maybe I was 23 when I started medical school, so early 20s. um, that's when I noticed that the weakness was starting. It's funny because I actually noticed it because of med school. I'm a
Mm,
DO. That's my doctorate degree. So a doctor of osteopathic medicine, or doctor of osteopathy, is what the DO stands for. And so, as part of that, we learn all of the same curriculum and do all the science classes and all of the biochemistry, the histology and pathology and all that stuff. Same as like what MD medical students learn, but we also learn osteopathic manipulative medicine, or osteopathic manipulative treatment, OMT, which is basically like musculoskeletal like manipulation. And I don't want to say it's the same as chiropractic stuff, but it's kind of, I guess, a similar analogy as that. So
hmm.
as part of that, we would have OMT lab a couple times a week, and where you're like working on each other. You're doing like, I mean, there is a bit of soft tissue stretches, manipulation, and then there's also the high velocity, low amplitude sort of cracking, the back cracking, that sort of stuff that we learned.
Yeah.
So as a part of that, we were like messing around with each other, as part of OMT lab. And I started noticing with my classmates that, like, I was sitting on the OMT table, and we both noticed. I was like, I'm having trouble lifting my leg up. And my partner,
Wow.
my classmate, I was working with that day, was like, yeah, why do you have trouble lifting your leg?
Hmm.
So, so that's actually like when things started to be noticed, when I started to
Right.
notice, and my classmates kind of noticed it with me.
Yeah. Did you also start noticing it at the same time with piano when you were playing piano, or did that kind of progress later with your hands and your fingers?
It affected my shoulder muscles later on. So the way
Okay.
it first presented was, it mainly was affecting my hip girdle muscles. So the hip muscles. Those are the ones that, your glutes, your butt. So that's why, and I was noticing that I would get tired, like walking long distances, and I couldn't keep up. That was also a major thing with going anywhere with like a group of people. Like I would always be trailing behind, like getting further and further behind. So that's kind of how the muscle weakness aspect presented itself. But during all that time, my arms hadn't yet become affected. So I was still playing piano during this time in med school.
Mm-hmm.
I actually never really, even after my private lessons ended when I graduated high school, I really kept playing piano all that time, even in med school and even in residency. I did notice though the shoulder muscles weakness. I would say I started noticing it probably at the end of med school. I could start to feel. Now it hadn't hindered my playing enough yet. I was still able to be at the piano, and play. But I was noticing it in the other daily life activities, like holding a hair dryer up to dry my hair.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think that was the thing that sticks out of my memory when I first started to realize my shoulder muscles were being affected because I was having a hard time blow drying my hair.
Was there a point where you felt you were in denial of what was happening? Was there ever a point where you thought maybe I'm just not getting enough sleep, or maybe I need to do something different with my lifestyle? Or did you kind of know right away, because you were in med school, that this was a condition that you needed to address?
I think I just knew right away. I never, that thought actually has never crossed my mind, that it was anything that I could get away from or try to change or hope away or wish away. I think it's because and I don't know, maybe that's actually a good question. Maybe it was just because I was already studying human, disease and pathology anyway. Because I guess, yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. That's never crossed my mind. So no, it never really came across. It never, it never occurred to me. And also too, that when I started getting workup from a neurologist in med school, like when my classmate and I were noticing that this would have been at the end of my first year of medical school. So when we noticed I was having trouble lifting up my legs when we were doing OMT. And funny enough, I didn't actually even get referred to the neurologist because of the muscle weakness, because I also have epilepsy. So I had a seizure during the beginning of my second year of med school. And that was actually the reason that got me into a neurologist's office in the city that I was doing med school. So I actually had my first seizure when I was a high school student, a high school senior. And
wow.
So I had seen a neurologist, and they put me, they tried me on various medications, and I ended up having a second seizure during my freshman year of college. So it was like 9 months later.
Yeah.
And then so we went through like different seizure medicines, and my mom was in denial. I would say definitely with the seizures. She didn't want to admit that I needed to be on medicine. She didn't want me to have to be on medicine. And so she actually, funny enough, went down the whole faith, like church religion, prayer rabbit hole. So she wanted to, she tried to get me into all the church prayer groups and have the prayers over me and praying away the disease. And at one point she wanted me to take a semester off in undergrad, and she pulled me to China because she wanted me to try the Chinese Eastern medicine. They did like acupuncture, I think.
Yeah.
They were like poking me like in my knees, and I don't know, I don't remember what all they did, but acupuncture was part of it. I was probably drinking all sorts of the herbal medicines. I don't really know what I was drinking. But I don't know. I was, what, you're in college, so I was 19 or 20. Still pretty young back then. And when you're that age, like you're not yet emotionally fully developed to where you feel like you know what to do with your life. Especially when
Right.
it comes to medical stuff. And
Yeah.
so I didn't know what to think, when these seizures started when I was in high school and we were in the doctor's offices and the doctors were recommending seizure medicines. And my mom, because she didn't want to admit that I needed to be on medicine, she would complain about side effects that like, oh, it's causing this and it's causing that. So that, whether it was or not, I don't really know at this point, but that was her concern. And so
Yeah.
that's part of the reason why I went through so many medication trials
Right.
with the earlier neurologist. And we even changed neurologists too. Like, I remember there were two different neurologists when I was. This was in my home when I was in my hometown. So I stayed in local town for undergrad. So I was like in the same place and seeing those two different neurologists. And then when I had that second seizure during my freshman year of college, then that was with the neurologist number two. And then for some reason, I somehow remember going back to the first neurologist. I don't know what happened there. Like, I don't know whose idea that was. If it was my mom's or something like that. I don't know. But we somehow, like, I just remember we ended up back in the first neurologist's office. He was like, "Welcome back."
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think with parents, especially when they're from different cultures, they want to do everything they can to make sure that they're trying something from their culture maybe before they trust in Western medicine. Because yeah, my parents are Chinese, and although I don't have any kind of chronic condition, my sister did go through knee surgery and knee dislocations, and there was a lot of emphasis on making her ligaments stronger with Chinese medicine. And I think there's not it's not necessarily to say that Chinese medicine doesn't work, um, but it also is just more, it maybe prevents sometimes if you put too much emphasis on that kind of medicine that doesn't actually address the root cause of the problem, that it might delay the treatment that you actually need. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it seems like your mom had to come to terms with that, and I'm sure it was hard for her as well, and for you, when you not only you were diagnosed with epilepsy, but then a few years later found out that you also had myopathy. And so yeah, how did you grapple with that emotionally and physically? Like, I'm assuming you were still experiencing epilepsy seizures while you were starting to go through the muscle weakness.
Well, so thankfully, the seizure during my second year of med school, that was the third seizure in my lifetime. That is what
Okay.
landed me back in the neurologist's office.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I was like, so there was the period of like the college, I minus the one during my freshman year of college, I and all of that, I ended up off medicine. I was not taking the seizure medicine, and because my mom just didn't want to admit, and we were going down the religious prayer group routes, and so they all thought they prayed it away for me. Um, so I was just floating out there in college and the start of med school and not on any seizure medicine. So when the seizure happened, then that was a wake up call to me.
Yeah.
That I was like, okay, I know it's a sign that I need to be on medication. So my mom flew back from China. That my parents have a manufacturing business in China, so she emergently flew back and came to stay with me because when you have a seizure, you can't drive. Every state has a period of time where you can't drive, and so
Oh,
it's
okay.
the where I was at the time. It was the standard. It's more common in most states have you can't drive for 6 months. So
Wow.
she came to
After
stay
each
with me.
seizure. So it
Hmm.
resets if you keep having multiple seizures or just from the last one.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
which is completely appropriate because
Right.
if you're not stable,
Yeah.
it's not safe to be behind the
Yeah.
wheel. And yeah, and so if there's another seizure that happens, absolutely it makes sense that the clock
Yeah.
needs to restart. So
Right.
that was like a huge disruption because at the time my I actually lived off campus, and it was like in like the northern part of the suburb. Like it was probably like a 25-minute drive to campus, and so so I can drive. So she came, and because they're the school, my med school has like an apartment complex like right next to campus. So a lot of the students chose to stay in that apartment complex and just walk to class. So when the seizure happened and she came back, she helped get me moved. She helped get me an apartment, and she helped me get moved on to campus. I mean, it wasn't like a total moving. We still kept the place, my original place, but it was just the bare necessities: put a mattress in, put a bed in, maybe a
Yeah.
table and a couch of some sort. But it was very bare bones. So that was a major disruption. But while I was back in the neurologist talking about the seizure, then I also brought up, oh, by the way, it seems like my leg is weak. so so
Yeah.
they were like checking me around, and they sent me off for testing of an EMG. So the type of neurological procedure that investigates the muscle is called an EMG. So they did
Okay.
that, and again, funny enough, so the first the first neurologist who read my first EMG actually read it as normal.
Oh, interesting.
They didn't, yeah, they didn't pick it up. And so, but the neurologist, the general neurologist that I was seeing, I mean, it was obvious. It was something was noticeable. They were like, yeah, it's something's not right. So she referred me to a neuromuscular specialist at
Mm-hmm.
the university medical center in town, and it was with the neuromuscular specialist at the academic medical center. They repeated the EMG, and all it took was one poke. Um, they just had to poke one place, and they were like, okay, yep, I can see the abnormality. That was consistent with that of being
Yeah.
a muscle disease type of a process. Whereas in an EMG, they typically have to poke um, several sites on whatever limb that's being ordered. There's usually
Mm-hmm.
multiple sites that they check. With both, there's two parts of an EMG. There's the nerve conduction part where they take different electrodes and they do little shocks and zaps to check how your nerves are conducting, the nerve conduction speeds. And then the second part, which was with the needle. And they poke the needle into you. They ask you to contract the muscle. So the whole thing is very uncomfortable. Um,
Wow.
and the first EMG that got read as normal, my mom was in the room with me. She was doing the workup with me. I mean, she
Right.
was with me. They weren't, she wasn't doing it, but she was in the room with me, and and she's very squeamish, and she couldn't hardly stand to look. When the first EMG where they had to check multiple sites, and I don't remember how many, but it seems like they did like 5 different needle pokes or something
Oh
with the
my
first
goodness.
EMG that got read as normal. And then when I was then with the neuromuscular specialist, they only took one poke and was like, okay, yep, we see the abnormality. So that was a
Yeah.
relief. They didn't
Right.
have to poke me multiple times to see what they needed to see. And
Yeah.
then from there, then that's when they sent me off to do the muscle biopsy, where they cut out a little chunk of the tissue and they examine it under a microscope. So that's how they came to the broad category that it's some type of a mitochondrial myopathy. But the mitochondria, like if the high school biology, lesson is the mitochondria. Those are the powerhouse
The powerhouse.
organelles,
Yeah.
the powerhouse of the cell. Yeah,
Oh man, I
and
do remember that.
for anybody who remembers their cell bio from like
Yes.
high school. So it's the organelle that's like the little bean shaped thing with like the squiggles inside.
Yes.
That's what the mitochondria is. So it's something is pathologic with my mitochondria.
So when you received that diagnosis, what were your first thoughts? Were you relieved to know that there was something that you could address now, or were you more? Did you not have any kind of initial reaction, or yeah, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so the time frame was, I was with the neuromuscular specialist, and at that point the muscle biopsy hadn't happened yet. That muscle biopsy, it took several months to get scheduled. But I do remember the neurologist appointment where once they did that one poke on the EMG and they saw that there was a muscle disease process, the neurologist already knew that there was some muscle pathology. So I very distinctly remember at that appointment, it was very heart wrenching. It's one of those things, like when you are getting bad news. Like for me, what I remember experiencing is like the room sound like went. It was like it was like echoing, like it's almost like you're like
Yeah.
stepping away. It's like you're trying to. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but I heard her talking, and she was talking. She was already talking about, well, later on when you go through med school, you'll start using a scooter. Talking about mobility aids already at that
Oh, she was
appointment.
just wow.
She was
Okay.
laying it out, yeah. So she was laying it out, giving me it was an accurate prognosis, but so she was like saying, yeah, and this type of thing tends to be progressive. So you'll be, it'll probably benefit you most to start using a scooter when you need to go through your clinical rotations, and wheelchair. You can expect that type of a thing, and she was really nice. Like there was nothing I had against her.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was nothing wrong with the way she broke the news, but it's just as the shock of hearing it and hearing something so scary. I mean, I was in my young 20s,
Yeah.
by the time I was in there, and having all of this daunting future painted, that would be what would be to come. It was scary. So that day, both my parents, I remember they were there for that. My dad somehow had come for that doctor's appointment too, and I do remember crying when we left. Well, I'm sure that I even cried in the appointment, but definitely as like a chat, a family chat. I was definitely scared, crying, and like like, oh my gosh, like what is this is gonna be horrible, and how are we gonna how are we gonna deal with this? And then my dad was just trying to be, because he was always more laid back,
Mm.
very very chill. My mom is like just a go go go, like high pressure. I
Yeah.
take after her. I can admit it. That's a flaw. I'm the same as her. It's like I'm my mother's daughter. So we're both very high strung and
Yeah.
high pressure and high detail and go 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 and quack quack quack. So my dad was the calm
Yeah.
voice and said, "Well, sis, he loved to call me he just called me sis. We'll just take one day at a time." That was what his
Yeah.
take was in the moment. So from that, even though I had not yet had the muscle biopsy, and that was months down the road, so I didn't know the specific diagnosis yet, but I knew this ominous future was coming. So I think that must have been in the fall, because I do remember there was one Christmas that was horrendous. I was crying, I was sobbing, just all the time, and I think that must have been in the time period where I was in this process of getting diagnosed. Because I do remember my muscle biopsy. We had to fly up to Ohio. My neuromuscular specialist had to. She referred me out of state, and we had to fly up there for me to get the muscle biopsy done. But
Yeah.
that Christmas, in that time of January, was when I got the muscle biopsy done. So that Christmas before the January that I got the muscle biopsy done, I just remember it was horrible. I was just crying, like crying randomly,
Right.
night and day. I remember there was one day I was like in this screaming rampage, and my mom was like, I'm sure they were just, my family didn't know what to do, what to say, how to console and stuff. And my mom was just, we were in the living room and I was screaming about something. I don't remember what we were talking about. But then she was like, why are you so angry? So that's kind of what life was like, in that time
Yeah.
period. And then now talking about getting the muscle biopsy results, there actually was a sense of relief
Hmm.
that they were actually able to give me a name. Because believe it or not, for a substantial portion of patients, they go about having medical symptoms for a long time
And they have no
without
name
being
for
able to
it.
get answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I am lucky in the sense that my muscle biopsy was able to show the histologic findings that pointed toward it being a mitochondrial disease
Right.
category. Because even amongst mitochondrial disease patients, it's a very like multi-system, many different types of presentations, and some of the testing can be normal in them. So even mitochondrial disease patients, a big portion of them can walk around undiagnosed for years, not knowing, what's going on, or maybe even being told nothing is going on by the doctors.
Yeah.
So not being believed by the doctors. So looking back, I do have that to be grateful for,
Right.
that my test results have always shown something was wrong. So I didn't have to feel crazy, like, you
Well,
know,
I mean, that in itself seems like an injustice that, I mean, it's that you need to have a name, like something that's already been stamped as like something that's already been, seen as a consensus in the medical community as like a disorder or a disease or a condition. Like it seems like it gives you more power as a patient to advocate for yourself and find the right doctors and find the right medication if you have like a name for your condition. But I imagine like
yeah,
if you're someone with chronic illness and symptoms, but all the doctors have different opinions, then it must be very overwhelming and just like heartbreaking to not
yeah,
know what's actually going on and have people not really be able to pinpoint it. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and then knowing the name, the category, like that then and I was a medical student at this point, like
Right.
knowing some information, being able to
Yeah.
scientifically understand a little
Yeah.
bit. I mean, obviously, I knew nothing as what a resident level
Hmm.
physician would know, or an attending, physician that I am now, but no real expertise. But I'm able to read the literature, and
Yeah.
I was able to then read up on the diagnosis. Now, it turns out, so mitochondrial disease is like this enigmatic, disease process where they don't actually know, they have never been able to find the specific genetic mutation that
Oh.
caused me to. It very much is apparent on my muscle biopsy histologic findings. But I had my muscle biopsy done, this was in 2008. So the world of genetics was just in its infancy. So they only knew of a few different point mutations that was, what was associated with. They initially thought that it was a specific syndrome called Murph syndrome because of my history of the epilepsy.
Okay.
Murph syndrome, it stands for mitochondrial epilepsy with ragged red fibers. And so the ragged red fibers, those are the histologic findings seen on my muscle biopsy. That is the specific entity that points that says it's a mitochondrial disease process. And the
Hmm.
myoclonic epilepsy part, that is what kind of what my epilepsy type presented as. That's what it sounded like.
Right.
Because I had little muscle arm jerks. So those are like myoclonic seizures or myoclonus. So that's why initially the neuropathologist, when she called me with the results, they initially thought I matched that, but it, they only knew 4 genetic mutations to test for from the muscle tissue itself at the time, and it came up negative. Which it didn't exclude that; it just meant that the science at the time wasn't it wasn't there wasn't enough mutations known and to be able to be tested for. But anyway, I got the name of this Murph syndrome, so I was like reading up all about it, um, and with mitochondrial disease patients, like it's common for people to be of short stature. So
Oh,
and so
interesting.
I'm 4 feet 8 inches tall, so very short.
Yeah.
So it kind of, it kind of all
Huh.
like fits and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's another part of it too is somehow I ended up with being referred to an ophthalmologist. Um, I don't really know what specific symptom or if they were just being thorough checking. But anyway, it turns out, and this is also what's kind of like described as part of this Murph syndrome picture, is the optic nerve. So the optic nerve is the big nerve that comes out of your eyeball that then connects to the back of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this entity called optic nerve atrophy. Atrophy means like just wasting away,
Yeah.
wasting away of the optic nerve. So, which a clinical exam finding is that the optic nerves look very pale when you dilate someone's eyes and you look at the optic nerves. So that I did go see several neuro-ophthalmologists, and they saw that finding. So I do have optic nerve atrophy.
Wow.
So luckily, it hasn't affected my vision in a global way. So I'm able to see
Mm-hmm.
just fine.
Right.
But it's like I first saw the neuro-ophthalmologist like right around the time that I had the muscle biopsy, and then later on in med school, when I moved away somewhere else for the second half of med school, and I was, properly taking seizure medicines. I got myself back on seizure medicines and stayed on it. So I got referred to a neuro-ophthalmologist, a second one, and they checked and saw the same findings. And then when I moved to the other place for residency, then again in the establishing care with new doctors, I also got referred to a neuro-ophthalmologist there, so they saw it. They saw it. And even when I moved to where I currently live now as an attending, I happened to go see a neuro-ophthalmologist here in town just to see if not at this point was it going to disappear, because it's not going to disappear, but how much progression there
Yeah.
is. But they all just said, yeah, it's there. They can see it.
Yeah. And I have a question about, so, you're a practicing or an attending physician. So how, and I'm assuming when you see your patients, you are in your wheelchair. Is that right?
Well, interestingly, so I've been in attending for 9 years now.
Okay.
So when I my schedule changed last summer a year ago.
Okay.
So I actually no longer see patients in the clinic side. I had to cut back to part-time, and I chose to stick with seeing patients, elective admissions in the epilepsy monitoring unit, which is patients come in to the hospital to stay in. They have a week's long EEG testing. I'm an epilepsy specialist, so that's my subspecialty. So, but back when I was having a clinic load for all of the previous, 8-9 years before I stopped, because my office was it was right across the hallway from my exam room. It was a small enough distance that I could just walk from my office into the exam room, because I only had one exam room. And the way our practice was that you kind of had your exam room assigned to you. So it worked out, luckily enough, that I have an office that was just right, directly in front of my office. I always would rather have preferred walking in, because you feel more normal, when you get to just be walking around people. So
yeah, it's interesting. I think in, all my life, all of my doctors have walked in, and it's interesting that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of representation of people who have disabilities who are doctors and physicians and who just walk in, and I don't know exactly how a patient would, psychologically react to that, like if they see their doctor walking in, or like in a wheelchair coming in, how they would react to that, and if they would treat the doctor differently. That's why I was curious. But it seems like you mainly had the experience of walking.
Well, so the clinic side of things, unless they happened to need to be referred into the epilepsy monitoring unit, and if I happened to be covering the service that week that they saw me, because the way that I got around, I was mentioning that my neurologist, our very first neurologist, was already talking about that I would need scooters and wheelchairs. So I did. I did need to use the scooter for rounding all over the hospital. And so I actually showed up. So all of these years, ever since I was in clinical rotations as a med student, I have always used starting out an electric scooter where I would just follow the team,
Right.
on my scooter. And then, so this little seat cane situation thing that I was talking about, I carried that on the back of my scooter. And so when the team would walk into the patient room, because it's bulky, there's no room, to have a scooter in a hospital room. So I was able to walk enough that
Yeah.
I would just walk in with the team, sit down on this little fold up little seat, and then just fold it back up and put it back on my scooter, and off we go. But when I would be riding around the hospital, then they would see me riding
Mm.
around on this mobility aid. So
Yeah.
I did that. I was able to be ambulatory enough. Well, ambulatory meaning I was able to walk enough that I only needed to use the scooter, meaning I could walk the rest of the time and just use the scooter. So I was able to use the scooter all throughout, well, my second half of med student clinic rotations, and then as a resident and a fellow, I was able to get away with only needing the scooter. So in residency, I managed to have a accommodation set up to where security found a parking spot for me, because I just drove a normal car. I had
Yeah.
like I drove a 2007 Honda Civic for like
Nice.
10 years,
Classic. Yeah.
all throughout this time. So it was just a normal car. I didn't have an electric powered
Mm-hmm.
wheelchair, and the scooter, I can't break it down, disassemble and assemble it again and lift it into the car. I can't bend over and pick up anything off the floor. So the accommodation that the hospital was able to work out for me was that I we found a spot in, this is my residency hospital. We found a spot. There was like a security desk just coming in inside like the garage door. So I parked my scooter there every night, and then I don't know if they designated me a spot. Anyway, I think it was designated me. So I was able to So these are you. One of your questions earlier had been like, what are the adjustments?
Mm-hmm.
So like every few years, enough of the muscle weakness progresses to the point where there is a substantially noticeable drop in decline.
Mm-hmm.
So this is every few years, as I was getting weaker and weaker and being able to walk less and less. These are the accommodations that came up. Because actually, I do remember during my intern year, which is your first year as a resident physician, I actually was parking my scooter up. I was just leaving it up in the intern or in the resident call rooms. I would just park it there overnight, and then I would walk down and out to the parking lot where all the residents parked their cars, because I was able to walk that distance. But then as I progressed into my PGY1, which is the actual neurology resident years, then it got to be where I could no longer walk that big distance to get from the car parking lot to the residence lounge. So that's when we came up with this new situation and putting my scooter up overnight. So then when I moved away to fellowship, that was a change in hospital. And, you have to go through this whole administrative work, to get these accommodations. But I asked the hospital that same thing. I was like, is there a spot that we can park the scooter overnight? And this is where can I be designated a parking spot? And it did end up working out that I was able to have that same thing. So I was ambulatory, walking, quite a bit in most of the time. And it would just be when I had to go around and see patients around the hospital campus, that I would be on the mobility aid, on the electric scooter. And then out in the personal life, when I would be going out and about with my husband, then we had the manual wheelchair, and he just took care of folding it up and putting it in and out of the car. So, so that's kind of like how.
Yeah,
So
it sounds like you have a lot of adjustments.
So the patients did see me, clearly having some sort of a mobility issue. And then I did notice that, because it's very obvious when I walk that something is not right
Mm-hmm.
with the
Mm-hmm.
way that I look like a neuromuscular patient when I walk.
Yeah.
So, and the intuitive, either patients or caregivers or family members, some of them started to ask me in clinic when I was an attending here.
Mm.
They the astute, observant ones would ask me,
Right.
is everything okay? Or I've got back issues. Like, do you have back issues? It's because
Yeah.
they could see me. Even though I was
Yeah.
walking into the clinic room, they actually could still see that something was
Mm-hmm.
affecting me. But
Yeah,
in the
it seems
hospital setting, though, I was always using the scooter.
yeah. It seems like it's we never think of doctors as being able to be patients as well. And it's like you either have to just wear the doctor hat in order to yeah, to not be seen as the patient hat, but yeah, sometimes you can be both. I want to ask you one more question related to piano, and then I have a wrap up question. So
Sure.
so I did want to bring up the sling that you wear when you play piano. So you mentioned to me that you use a particular type of harness for your arms when you're playing piano. Can you tell me everyone what that harness is and how you
Yeah,
came about
well,
it?
when my arms got to the point where they were so weak that I couldn't lift them anymore at the piano, I actually completely stopped playing because I just
Mm-hmm.
couldn't properly my arms be in position. So I was just too I was not that I was not willing to accept not
Mm-hmm.
being able to play piano. I
Yeah.
mean, at that point, I was doing both to take care of my mental health. I had gotten myself back into counseling. Like in all of the years of in the beginning years when I was first going through the diagnosis, the way that how I actually overcame was I had a very good mentor in med school. He referred me to a therapist, and it was with the
Mm-hmm.
help of a therapist was the one that taught me how to cope and how I was able to, you know, come to terms and live a happy life and not be. I learned to not be bothered, by these
Yeah.
things. It took many years with therapy, of course, because it was hard. But
Yeah.
so at this point, and this would have been in the recent 5 or 6 years that I was not. I knew that my arms just could not play at all. So I got myself back into therapy to specifically know that I needed to talk about the grief of what is going to happen if I completely lose piano out of my life. And
Hmm.
then at the same time, then I decided to build my own device, come
Yeah.
up with my own system to hold up my arms just as a last ditch effort, just because I wanted to try it.
Right.
So I figured out the configuration that, your arms need to be in when you're at the piano. So I was able to come up, my husband, helped me build it. So we came up with this device of, it's a very rudimentary, device. It's just this metal frame. It's actually a portable coat rack, and it's
Yeah.
zip tied to the piano bench. So there's like this
Oh,
frame,
so cool.
the metal frame, and he zip tied the bottom of it to the piano bench so it doesn't, because it was rocking. It was tilting back and forth a lot.
Uh-huh.
And then there's these two elastic things that are that they're elastic in strong enough that they're able to hold my arms, but not so stiff that I can't actually press down to press the keys. And so it took some like figuring out of the height and the length and all of that stuff, but I was able to manage to be able to figure it out to where I'm I'm close to in the right position to where I need to be able to grab onto the keys.
Yeah.
But then the harness actually it wraps around my upper arm and my lower arm right around the elbow, and that is what keeps my arm in the correct position facing forward. That keeps my elbows positioned correctly. So that's how I was able to come up with it. And my husband actually, we went out into the stores and figured out the material and stuff. So there was a
That's
bit of a
amazing.
engineering process.
Yeah. No, I mean, kudos to you and your husband for figuring it out because I think this is probably like the only type of, I don't know, maybe accessory like this of its kind in the world potentially. So, maybe a business idea for you if you ever want to get into it. But I feel like it's working. I mean, based on your videos, I feel like you're still playing at a super high level, especially fantasy impromptu. So I think that's amazing that you're able to make it work. And I hope it, continues to work. I have one last question for you. This podcast does focus on mental health and disability, but also, self-compassion. So my last question for you is just, how are you going to show yourself kindness this week?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Yeah. Um, I guess to just not be not be too hard on myself, because I don't practice as often as I wish I that I would want to be, just because like there's days that and weeks that I just get too tired, so I don't
Yeah.
actually make it to the piano every day like I
Yeah.
really want, and what you need to in order to be able to actually make progress on a piece. So I guess, yeah, because I've been like thinking in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, it's been a full week since you made it to the piano, and I've been trying to work on some pieces, but I just haven't really completed any particular piece recently. So
Yeah.
I yeah, maybe I guess I can just try to remember to give myself some grace to not be so hard that I'm not making it to the piano as often as I want to.
Absolutely. You have a busy life, it seems. So it doesn't, yeah, it's okay. I didn't practice for like 3 years after I graduated from college. It's like, I can't do this anymore. Too much practicing. So time off is also good. And I think it actually helps with like muscle memory and things like that when you're playing. So yeah, show yourself some grace if you don't get to the piano. That's all I had for you today. Is there anything else you want to share before we sign off?
Well, I guess the whole reason why I'm even posting the silly little piano videos is because I guess I do want to show and bring awareness to disability, and from the patient sense
Yeah.
that for because all those horrible years that when I was struggling in the beginning of feeling hopeless and scared, and the loss of what the future is going to bring, that I want to be able to show others who may have a disability or any other struggle, who's in a dark place, the dark place that I was at. I mean, when you're in that dark of a place is how it felt. Like it's like this terrible black hole that you can't breathe. I mean,
Yeah.
that was when I was in that sobbing period, before I then later on got into counseling, who helped me work through that. And I pulled myself out of that dark hole.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just want to show that there is hope to still participate in life, to have a career. I mean, I am a physician, and it's very true what you said. Like, I have never known of another doctor who has a disability. I've seen some people
Yeah.
on social media, so the few of us do exist, but there
Yeah.
isn't much representation at
Right.
all. And so that's just, yeah, what I want to show to anybody who might be going through a struggle of their own, that there can be, it's a process. I'm not going to say it's
Yeah.
linear, because it's like it felt circular in my beginning days, where there are days where you feel at the top of the circle, meaning it's less painful.
Yeah.
Like, those are the good days. And then there's
Yeah.
the days where you're at the bottom of the circle. Those are the crying days and feeling you're
Yeah.
in this dark pit. So in my journey, all the days are at the bottom in that time period when I was sobbing all the time. But then slowly over time, and with the help of a counselor in the beginning years, more days I would be here. And then, still a major portion down here. And then as the years went by and I learned to cope, then more and more days became at the top of the circle. So
Yeah.
that I and that's how where I am right now is I pretty much live. By the time I met my husband when I was halfway through residency. I had already learned how to be at the top of the circle. So I just learned how to live, with it and stuff. I stopped crying, long before that. So I just want to say that it was like I moved beyond this unclimbable mountain, so there can be
Yeah.
light at the end of the tunnel, to where it doesn't always it doesn't always have to feel helpless if you don't want it to, because there is
Yeah.
certainly a point where it is up to you, the individual. You as the individual have to want to
Yeah.
not to be in this place, because there is,
Mm-hmm.
I think, I've seen out there a little bit of a victim mentality, and so sometimes people do. It's hard to get out of that dark pit. and you have to
Yes.
really work at it. And I really
Yes.
worked at it. This therapist really helped me, you know,
Good.
to get out of it. So you can only get out of therapy what you go in expecting to put in, you know,
Right.
type thing.
Yes.
But it definitely, it's out there. It's possible to live a full life, to be able to dream, to have a career, and get out and about doing things that you're passionate about. But then, and then speaking from like the general population who's not disabled, that yeah, I want to bring attention to the fact that disabled people should get to live a normal life. You know, employers, I would, you know, I would hope that more employers would be willing to entertain
Mm-hmm.
hiring people with disabilities. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
capable, you know, not everybody has the capability. Not all disabilities, you know, are only physical. There are cognitive disabilities as well. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that employers should be hiring people who would not be able to carry out job duties, but because of accessibility issues, accommodating wheelchairs, space, physical space. I mean, there's just random, you know, many things, but it is difficult for people with disabilities to get employment, for the ones who want to work. Now, there's certainly, I have encountered patients who don't really want to work, and they
Yeah.
would rather go on, you know, anyway. But I think there is a bigger portion of people with disabilities that can and want to work, but that just aren't being given a chance. And then there's all sorts of accessibility, you know, limitations. So, to employers out there, I just want to say we
Yeah.
don't have to be this huge scary liability. We can work.
Definitely
We're
not.
capable of working.
Yes. Capable of working, capable of playing music, and yeah, advocating. And yeah, I think it's super inspirational. And I think you're really doing important work, and putting awareness out there. So I think that's amazing. So I really appreciate you being on today, Louann. It was great talking to you, and I hope we can continue this conversation elsewhere. And I hope everyone listening learned something new. I know I learned a lot of medical terms that I have never heard of before, so thank you for that. um, so yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and I'll see y'all next time.